You stand before a moment that carries more weight than a number on a calendar. October 5th is presented to you like a fixed point in time. But what makes it powerful is not superstition, not myth, not some cosmic lottery ticket. It is the idea of a threshold. A threshold is the place where everything you've been walking through converges into something you can finally see. It's the seam between what was silent preparation and what becomes undeniable manifestation. Think of thresholds you've crossed before without naming them that way. The instant you stepped into a new role, the day a relationship turned from fragile to real, the morning you woke up and realized an old identity no longer fit. These weren't random hours pulled from a clock. They were convergences, years of subtle movement condensing into one irreversible shift. October 5th becomes a metaphor for that same kind of threshold. It is not about fear of missing out or clinging to an arbitrary date. It is about recognizing that life operates in windows, moments where accumulated weight presses so tightly that transformation has no choice but to occur. The strange thing is, you almost never notice thresholds while you're inside them. They don't announce themselves with fireworks or neon signs. Instead, they appear disguised as ordinary days. You might be making coffee, answering messages, or sitting in quiet frustration, and then something clicks. Not because the universe suddenly invented your opportunity, but because everything you've been carrying found its point of convergence. Imagine a bridge across a river that lowers only for a brief span. On one side is the field of waiting, struggle, patience, and practice. On the other side is what you've been hoping to reach. For months, sometimes years, you've been standing on the riverbank, uncertain if crossing would ever be possible. Then the bridge lowers. The chance is present, but fleeting. That's the essence of a threshold. It exists in time, but it is not owned by time. It belongs to readiness. Thresholds don't reward random wishing. They respond to what has already been sown. Seeds buried for months in darkness suddenly break through the soil, not because the calendar dictates it, but because everything underground has aligned for emergence. The moment is alive because the hidden process matured enough to surface. October 5th symbolizes that same unseen architecture. All the false starts, all the invisible work, all the endurance that felt wasted, those weren't delays, they were scaffolding. The threshold is when scaffolding falls away, and the structure it held begins to stand on its own. But here's the paradox: thresholds can only be recognized when you choose to see them as such. Someone else might treat that date as nothing more than a Saturday. You, however, can treat it as the convergence point of years of momentum. That recognition itself becomes part of the power. Awareness transforms an ordinary page of the calendar into a doorway. So when you hear October 5th, don't shrink it into numerals and deadlines. Expand it into metaphor. It represents any moment when preparation crystallizes, when silent growth becomes visible, when the invisible finally breaks into form. Thresholds are not mystical accidents, they are invitations. And now, as you approach this threshold, the question isn't whether the bridge exists. The question is whether you will walk across while it's lowered. And when you cross that first threshold, another question surfaces: what carried you here? What invisible weight, what hidden momentum built the conditions for this doorway to even appear? That's where the principle of accumulation steps into the light. Life doesn't usually move in straight, linear strides. It gathers, it stores, it compresses energy in silence, the way clouds collect moisture long before the storm. For a while, the sky looks frozen, unmoving, but in truth, the atmosphere is working overtime, stockpiling pressure until the only possible outcome is release. You've lived through seasons that felt like nothing was shifting. You poured in effort, repeated the practice, endured setbacks. Yet the outer scenery refused to budge. And so you wondered, was it all wasted? Was I moving but going nowhere? But here's the paradox. Those unmoving seasons are the times when the most invisible progress is taking place. Roots deepen in the soil before any green breaks the surface. Foundations set themselves in quiet earth long before towers rise. The pause is not emptiness, it is groundwork. Think of an athlete training in obscurity. Pre-dawn mornings, endless drills, sore muscles, invisible sweat. Years can pass without recognition, and yet beneath that veil of invisibility, resilience is forming. The pressure is layering itself. The unseen hours become the condition for the one visible victory that changes everything. Without the weight, there is no breakthrough. Without the storm clouds, there is no rain. Accumulation works like a sealed container. Inside, heat builds. Molecules quicken. The pressure rises. On the surface, the container looks the same, untouched, quiet. But beneath the lid, energy is mounting. And then one day, release is no longer optional. The system has matured to a breaking point, and what was trapped bursts into view. Your life follows that same physics. What felt like standstill was the slow tightening of a spring, the winding of a mechanism designed to fire when its time arrived. And yes, pressure is uncomfortable. It makes you question the purpose of your effort. It makes you wonder if silence means absence. But silence can mean storage. Stagnation can disguise orchestration. The exact moments that test your endurance, the hardest, are often the moments when the buildup is almost complete. You feel it as heaviness, as frustration, as the eerie suspicion that maybe all this striving means nothing. But in reality, the weight itself is a signal the container is nearly full, the chamber nearly ready to open. The storm does not announce its timing until the first flash of lightning. The seed does not signal the hour before it breaks through soil. Accumulation conceals itself, but never without purpose. And when the release comes, it feels sudden only because you couldn't see the long orchestration beneath it. The so-called overnight success is really years of invisible layering erupting at once. This is the deeper rhythm at work inside your own story. October 5th becomes less about a date on paper and more about the archetype of a release point, the time when your silent work collides with ripeness. You cannot rush this cycle, but you can recognize it. You can honor the pressure for what it truly is, evidence that something inside your field is reaching maturity. And here's another way to think of it. Music doesn't erupt in a single note. It builds through tension, through anticipation, through rests that seem silent but actually set the stage. Without those pauses, the crescendo would lose its meaning. In the same way, your pauses are part of the song of your life. They are the measures of silence that give the climax its force. Imagine also the tectonic plates beneath the earth. For decades, they shift quietly, almost invisibly, pressing against one another. Then one day, an earthquake erupts, reshaping the landscape in minutes. To call the earthquake sudden is to miss the truth. It was years in the making. Your breakthroughs follow the same geology. They feel abrupt, but they are ancient pressures finally finding release. So the next time you feel weighed down by delay, remember the storm system. Remember the sealed container. Remember the roots in the soil. These are not images of failure. They are portraits of how transformation gathers its strength before it appears. The accumulation itself is the proof that breakthrough is not only possible, it is inevitable. And when the release finally comes, you will see that every ounce of weight, every long pause, every so-called wasted hour was never wasted at all. It was the building of mass. It was the gathering of energy. It was the hidden physics of transformation waiting for its cue to arrive. And once it does, nothing remains the same. So after pressure builds and the release draws near, How do you know when it's coming? How do you recognize the quiet signals that momentum has shifted? Because here's the paradox: breakthrough rarely arrives with trumpets. It whispers first. It announces itself in fragments so subtle that most people dismiss them as coincidence, random luck, or noise. But in reality, they are the opening notes of a larger symphony about to rise. Think about the moment you catch a faint melody drifting from a distant celebration. You can't see the gathering yet. You only hear the softest rhythm in the air. That is what life does before it opens. It sends a signal disguised as almost nothing. And if you're not tuned, you shrug it off. But if you lean closer, you realize something is coming. These signals can be microscopic. A conversation with someone who suddenly sees your value. An opportunity so small it looks insignificant. A shift in your own mood after weeks of heaviness. These are not accidents. They are the atmosphere clearing its throat before the storm arrives. History is full of stories where a single overlooked signal became the doorway. The writer whose manuscript was rejected dozens of times notices one editor's handwritten note, promising. The athlete who lost for years suddenly feels a burst of energy and training that wasn't there before. The entrepreneur who spent nights wondering whether to quit sees one unexpected sale in a forgotten market. On the surface, these seem tiny, but tiny cracks in stone walls are the beginning of collapse. Science even has language for this. Researchers call them near-success experiences, the moments you almost win, but don't. Oddly, those moments sharpen your attention. They heighten focus. They make you notice the pattern. They make your brain lean forward. The signal is telling you, keep watching. You are closer than you think. But here's the challenge: signals are quiet, while frustration is loud. The moment you are nearest to breakthrough is often the moment discouragement screams the most. The silence of progress feels unbearable, and the weight convinces you nothing is changing. Yet right then, signals are whispering, and only those who can quiet their panic long enough to listen recognize them. Signals are everywhere if you're willing to tune your perception. They might arrive as synchronicities, meeting the right person at the right time, overhearing a phrase that lands in your chest, seeing an old pattern dissolve without effort. They may show up in dreams, in instincts, in feelings you can't rationalize but can't ignore. They're not random, they're resonance. October 5th becomes the metaphor for paying attention, for noticing that the bridge doesn't lower with sirens, it lowers quietly. And you either see it or you don't. The invitation is subtle, the whisper is enough, but only if you are awake enough to catch it. Imagine a farmer walking through fields at dawn. The ground looks barren, the plants unchanged. Then one morning he notices the faintest green edge piercing through the soil. To most eyes, it's nothing. To him, it's everything. That sliver of life is the signal that months of hidden work have reached their moment. Without noticing it, he could walk by and assume the land is still dormant. But by paying attention, he recognizes the season has turned. Your own life delivers these seedlings of change. They might not look grand, they might not carry fireworks, but if you know how to read them, you realize they're proof of something larger gathering behind the scenes. This is why awareness matters more than speed. The person who notices the first spark gets to prepare for the fire. The one who misses it wakes up later, surprised, scrambling, and signals multiply when you honor them. Recognition itself becomes a form of invitation. When you acknowledge even the smallest whisper, you amplify it. You tell the field of possibility, I see you, I'm ready. And that acknowledgement draws more signals toward you, more patterns revealing themselves, until the quiet hints become undeniable evidence. So let this be your practice. Stop dismissing the small, Stop calling coincidences random. Stop underestimating subtle nudges. The signals are already here, speaking softly. The only question is, are you listening? And yet, even when signals appear, there's a stage that almost everyone encounters: the breaking point. It is the moment when everything feels heaviest, when obstacles multiply instead of fading, when the path seems to close in just as you're closest to the opening. This paradox confuses nearly everyone. You imagine breakthrough should feel easier near the end. You believe momentum should accelerate smoothly, but often the opposite is true. The moment right before release is also the moment of greatest resistance. Think of a sealed pressure chamber. For hours it builds silently. The surface looks unchanged, but inside heat is pressing. Vibration is rising. And just before the release, the walls rattle, the container groans, the tension becomes nearly unbearable. That final resistance is not punishment, it is physics. Your own life mirrors this principle. After months of waiting, after years of trying, the instant you are nearest to breakthrough is often the instant that feels least survivable. Problems pile on, fatigue deepens, doubt grows louder, you feel cornered, and yet what's really happening is that accumulated energy is straining against the thin wall that still holds it. Breakthrough is inches away, but from your side of the wall, it looks infinite. History is full of these moments, athletes training for years only to fail repeatedly, then win in the season they almost gave up. Inventors enduring trial after trial, mistake after mistake, until the final experiment unlocks the discovery. The wall was never miles thick. It was inches, but when you're exhausted, an inch feels impossible. Michael Jordan was once cut from his high school basketball team. Imagine being a teenager told you're not good enough for the dream you carry. Many would have quit. He didn't. He trained harder, pressed deeper, endured the sharp edge of rejection. That moment of breaking wasn't the end. It was the refinement. It was the wall that forced him into greatness. Without that season of resistance, the legend we now know wouldn't exist. This is what the breaking point does. It asks you one more time, do you stop? Or do you strike again? Do you lay down your tools? Or do you lift them once more? Most give up with treasure inches away, never realizing how close they were. Psychologists call this resilience, the ability to keep going even when failure repeats, even when pressure mounts. Research shows achievement is less about talent and more about persistence. And persistence is tested at the breaking point, not in the comfortable middle. But here's the mystery: the weight you carry at the edge isn't wasted. It's an instructor. Every extra trial, every failed attempt, every painful delay adds muscle to the part of you that will need to stand once the door swings open. Without the heaviness, you wouldn't be strong enough to hold the opportunity when it arrives. Consider also the miner digging underground, day after day. He swings his pickaxe against stone. Nothing moves, nothing breaks. Sweat pours, muscles ache, and the thought creeps in, maybe there is nothing here. Then, after countless strikes, the wall finally gives way. Behind it lies a seam of gold that was always there, waiting just beyond reach. Had Huit the day before, the treasure would still exist, but he would never have touched it. That is the cruelty of the breaking point. It hides its proximity. It looks endless, when in truth it is only inches thick. And here's another metaphor: childbirth. The hours of labor feel unbearable, pain intensifies, and just when it seems impossible to continue, new life enters the world. The hardest contraction is also the last contraction. What feels like breaking is really birthing. So in your own journey, the breaking point is not a signal to turn back. It is the threshold demanding courage one last time. It asks for trust that all the weight has meaning. It challenges you to see pressure not as enemy, but as midwife. The force you feel pressing against you is also the force pushing you through. Remember this the next time everything seems darkest. The wall is thin. The treasure is near. The contraction is the sign that new life is about to arrive. Breaking doesn't end you. Breaking delivers you. And once you've reached the breaking point, another truth begins to surface: the role of your awareness itself. Because thresholds aren't just about endurance or pressure, they are also about perception. How you see the moment alters what the moment can become. This is where the quantum principle of observation comes into play. In physics, they call it the observer effect. The very act of watching a system changes its behavior. On a human level, it means your consciousness is never neutral. When you pay attention to your life with clarity, you don't just witness outcomes, you participate in shaping them. Think about this before October 5th, or any convergence moment. Multiple futures are alive in potential. Some carry stagnation, some carry breakthrough. They exist like parallel paths waiting for collapse into one. Which one solidifies depends in part on where your awareness rests. If you expect nothing, you often collapse into nothing. If you carry conscious focus, you tilt the field toward possibility. And this isn't mystical wishful thinking. It's the mechanics of how attention works. Psychologists demonstrate that what you repeatedly notice strengthens its neural pathways. What you anticipate, you prepare for. The brain sharpens itself around focus. In other words, your observation begins to rewire you for the reality you're expecting. But there's a catch. Observation colored by desperation often backfires, staring at your life through the lens of panic, through the energy of please change, please shift, creates turbulence. It's like trying to read your reflection in storm water. The agitation prevents clarity. This is the human equivalent of what physicists call decoherence, where the field of possibility collapses into the most probable outcome based on past patterns. The alternative is what we might call coherent observation. To look at your life not from frenzy but from presence, not from begging but from curiosity. To hold attention steady, like a calm mirror of the sky. In that steadiness, possibilities don't scatter, they align. And when they align, collapse bends toward breakthrough. This is why October 5th, or any threshold, is not passive. It isn't about sitting back and hoping the date brings you luck. It's about choosing how you observe as the moment arrives. Your perception is part of the creative mechanism. Your focus is part of the design. Consider the artist at work. Every brushstroke is shaped not only by paint and canvas, but by where the artist's eyes land. Look away in distraction, and the stroke falters. Stay present with attention, and the image takes form. Life works the same way. Awareness is the brush guiding the picture. So ask yourself, what version of reality are you reinforcing by how you observe? Are you feeding fear by staring only at what isn't working? Or are you strengthening possibility by holding attention on the signals, the whispers, the cracks in the wall? Your observation doesn't guarantee outcomes, but it tilts the scales. It influences which potential becomes visible, and that influence is enough to turn thresholds into gateways. Imagine two people standing at the same doorway. One sees only the locked handle, the immovable frame, the years of failed attempts. The other notices the faint light seeping through the cracks, the subtle sound of hinges beginning to shift. Both are looking at the same door, but their observation creates entirely different realities. One walks away in defeat. The other leans forward, places a hand on the frame, and discovers the door was never truly locked. It only required presence to open. This is why observation is not passive. It is active participation in your own unfolding. Every time you choose to see a sign as signal rather than accident, you participate. Every time you interpret stillness as storage rather than stagnation, you participate. Every time you hold curiosity instead of despair, you participate. The field of possibility doesn't move around you, it moves through you. And remember, coherent observation doesn't demand you deny fear or pretend doubt doesn't exist. Coherence is not about perfection. It's about including the full truth of your experience. Fear, hope, doubt, faith, without letting panic dominate the lens. You observe with wholeness, not with suppression. This is what allows your observation to create clarity instead of chaos. So as October 5th approaches, let your practice be this: become the calm witness of your own convergence. Pay attention without desperation. Notice without forcing. Trust that observation itself is a force, and that force is guiding the collapse of potential into reality. And when you do, you'll find the paradox resolved. It isn't that watching changes nothing, it's that watching with presence changes everything. Observation opens the doorway, but choice is what carries you through it. And this is where the distinction becomes crucial, the difference between wanting and choosing. Most people approach threshold moments from a posture of wanting. They want relief. They want success. They want change. But wanting is soaked in lack. It says, I don't have, and I hope life will deliver. It's magnetic in reverse. The more intensely you want, the more the field reflects back the gap, the distance, the absence. Choosing is different. Choosing emerges from recognition of agency. It doesn't deny struggle, but it does declare, I am ready to step. Choice carries a frequency of coherence. It aligns thought, feeling, and action into one vibration. And when coherence reaches critical mass, the field shifts. What seemed improbable becomes inevitable. Think of coherence like a symphony. When instruments are tuning separately, the sound is scattered, even harsh. But when they align on key, the room vibrates with harmony greater than any single note. Your inner state functions the same way. If your mind longs, but your emotions doubt and your body hesitates, the field hears dissonance. But if mind, heart, and body resonate with the same choice, coherence amplifies your signal. This is why October 5th, or any moment of convergence, calls less for longing and more for alignment. Wanting alone cannot collapse probability. Choosing in coherence can. And coherence is not about pretending to be fearless or endlessly positive. True coherence includes your doubts, your wounds, your uncertainty, but holds them inside a larger container of trust. It allows fear to exist without letting fear be conductor of the symphony. It says, yes, I feel the tremble, but I choose anyway. That choice stabilizes frequency more than blind optimism ever could. So the practice becomes this: listen inward. Notice where your wanting still carries contradiction. Then ask, what would it feel like to choose not to wait for proof, but to align as though proof is already in motion? Choice transforms wanting into embodiment. It transforms hope into readiness. It transforms scattered intention into coherent signal. And once coherent, the field has no option but to respond. Picture two people standing at the same crossroad. One says, I want a new path, but I'm waiting for the sign to be undeniable. The other says, I choose this path now, and every step I take will confirm it. The terrain under their feet may be the same, but their realities diverge instantly. The first waits for permission, the second generates momentum. Coherence builds like fire. A spark alone is weak, but when spark, oxygen, and fuel converge, flames leap upward. Your mind provides the spark. Your emotions provide oxygen. Your actions provide fuel. Only when they align does the fire sustain. Wanting without choosing is like spark with no oxygen, it dies out quickly. Choosing without coherence is like striking matches in the wind, but when choice, feeling, and action unite, fire takes root and it spreads. This is why alignment matters more than intensity. Wanting can feel desperate, intense, overwhelming, yet still scatter energy. Choosing may appear quieter, calmer, but it channels power with precision. A laser is nothing more than light aligned. Its strength comes not from volume, but from coherence. Your inner field works the same way. Think of leaders, creators, or innovators who carried coherence. They weren't merely wishing, they were choosing. Every cell in their body was aligned with the outcome before it became visible. That alignment bent probability in their favor, and you've seen this in smaller ways too, the moment you finally decided to leave the job, or pursue the training, or confess the feeling that choice altered reality more in one day than months of quiet wanting did. Coherence has another quality: it attracts resonance. When you are coherent, people feel it, opportunities feel it, doors sense it and open more easily. Not because the universe suddenly handed you luck, but because your field stopped sending mixed signals. It stopped hesitating, stopped contradicting, stopped sabotaging. It began to hum in one frequency, and the world responded. So as October 5th approaches, let the shift be this: stop asking only, "What do I want?" and begin asking, "What am I ready to choose?" Because wanting keeps the threshold abstract. Choosing walks you through it. And once you step through, coherence amplifies your arrival. Once choice has been made and coherence begins to hum, something remarkable happens: emergence. This is the phenomenon where countless small actions, quiet shifts, and unseen alignments suddenly converge into a visible pattern. Nature is full of these demonstrations. Think about a flock of starlings sweeping across the sky. No single bird commands the group, yet together they move as one fluid body. The pattern is not imposed from above, it emerges from the simple signals multiplied across the many. Your life behaves in similar ways. Every small decision, every subtle adjustment, every step that once felt invisible begins to gather into a larger pattern you could not see until it took shape. Emergence is the reason breakthroughs feel sudden. They are not sudden, they are accumulations revealing themselves at last, like a field that looks barren until the first shoots break through, or like water heating slowly until it reaches the boiling point. Emergence is the revelation of hidden choreography. Consider innovation. The light bulb was not born in a single flash, but from hundreds of experiments layered until the system tipped. Scientific revolutions, social movements, even personal transformations all emerge when the small shifts achieve critical density. The tipping point comes not from one dramatic act, but from the quiet weight of many. And emergence does not only apply to external outcomes, it also applies to your internal world. Patterns of resilience, clarity, courage, these two emerge from repeated inner choices. Meditation practiced daily for months, honest conversations accumulated over years, the courage to say yes to opportunities that scare you. All of these micro actions add up. One day, you realize you've become someone new without ever witnessing the exact moment it happened. October 5th, then, becomes a symbol of emergence. It's the day when what has been invisibly layering suddenly takes shape before your eyes. The murmuration reveals itself. The boiling water spills into steam. The invisible becomes undeniable. But here's the wonder: emergence is exquisitely sensitive to initial conditions. A tiny shift at the beginning, a conversation you almost ignored, A choice you almost delayed can alter the whole pattern that eventually forms. This is why presence in the small things matters. The small is never just small. It is seed for the great. So when you feel like your steps are insignificant, remember the murmuration. Remember the field. Remember that every subtle action is bending the shape of the pattern you will eventually inhabit. Emergence is happening, whether you notice or not. The only question is, will you recognize the pattern as it forms? Think also of music. A symphony does not arrive in one note. It begins with scattered tones, fragments, tuning instruments individually. They sound incomplete, but when they gather under rhythm, something transcendent emerges. Life works this way too. What once felt like disconnected noises, jobs that didn't fit, relationships that ended, risks that faltered suddenly compose a song. You realize each note was leading you toward the harmony that now plays. Or picture the way crystals form. Molecules float in liquid without order, appearing random. Then, with the right conditions, they snap into place, creating intricate shapes of astonishing beauty. That order was always latent, waiting. Your journey is no different. All the floating pieces of your life are seeking coherence. And when alignment arrives, structure emerges seemingly overnight. Even ecosystems show us this truth. A forest may appear chaotic, yet every root, fungus, insect, and leaf participates in a network that supports the whole. Patterns emerge from the invisible exchange of nutrients, the constant cycling of death and renewal. You too are part of a hidden ecology connections. Choices, influences interacting until a new landscape takes form within you and around you. This is the beauty of emergence. You cannot force it, but you can prepare for it. You prepare by honoring the small, by staying consistent, by noticing the whispers instead of dismissing them. Every coherent choice adds weight to the invisible system, and when the tipping point comes, what was once fragile becomes undeniable. So if October 5th carries meaning, let it be this, the day the invisible choreography reveals its dance. The day you realize that what you thought were scattered fragments were actually building blocks of a larger pattern. The day you see that nothing was wasted, not the false starts, not the delays, not the quiet repetitions. Everything was arranging itself into the shape of your emergence. Every emergence is part of a cycle, and cycles carry their own wisdom. To see thresholds clearly, you must also understand endings, releases, and renewals. Nature never moves in a straight line. Forests grow, conserve energy, break down, and regenerate. Seasons turn from growth to harvest, from harvest to decay, from decay to rebirth. Every living system participates in this rhythm. So do you. When old structures collapse, when patterns dissolve, when relationships or jobs or identities fall apart, it is tempting to call that failure. But in truth, it may be the release phase of your own adaptive cycle. What looks like death may actually be renewal preparing itself. Think of fire in the forest. To the untrained eye, it looks like destruction, trees falling, smoke rising, ash spreading. But ecologists know the fire clears space, recycles nutrients, and awakens seeds that only germinate under heat. Without the fire, the forest stagnates. Without release, no new growth can come. October 5th, as metaphor, represents not just convergence, but also transition from release to renewal. It's the day when endings reveal their hidden gift, the opening for beginnings. The pain of dissolution is the soil for transformation. And the same applies to inner life. Old beliefs burn, outworn versions of self collapse, habits crack open. The discomfort you feel is not evidence of error. It is evidence that your system is recycling itself for the next stage. Ancient traditions understood this. They marked cycles with rituals of letting go, harvest festivals, Winter solstice ceremonies, rites of passage, they honor death as part of life, loss as doorway to rebirth. Our modern culture often resists endings, clings to permanence, fears dissolution, but the wisdom remains cycles must turn, and endings are never final. Consider the butterfly. The caterpillar does not simply grow wings, it dissolves inside the chrysalis. Its body breaks down into near liquid before reorganizing into something entirely new. If you judge the process midway, you would see only destruction. But the so-called destruction is the exact condition required for transformation. Your life mirrors this. The collapse of what you once knew is not an error, it is the chrysalis stage, the alchemy of renewal. Or think about farming cycles. A field cannot yield harvest after harvest without pause. The soil must rest, must lie fallow, must be broken and turned. If you only demanded constant output, the land would lose its vitality. Your own cycles of rest, endings, even perceived failure, are the fallow seasons that restore your depth. They prepare you for fertility that endurance alone cannot create. Psychology echoes this rhythm. Researchers studying resilience find that post-traumatic growth, the profound expansion that sometimes follows crisis, emerges not despite breakdown, but because of it. When old frameworks collapse, the psyche reorganizes on a deeper level, producing strength and perspective that stability alone could never generate. Breakdown becomes breakthrough, release becomes renewal. This is why resistance to endings often prolongs suffering. Trying to cling to what is dissolving is like clutching ash. You cut your hands and you miss the soil it was meant to enrich. But if you honor the release, you discover it is compost for the next phase. The grief you carry is fertilizer for wisdom. The loss you mourn is nourishment for resilience. So October 5th does not only symbolize convergence, it also symbolizes the turning of the cycle, the day when you recognize endings not as punishment, but as invitations, the day when you see that release is part of rhythm, and rhythm always moves toward renewal. And perhaps the most liberating truth of all, you are not failing when something ends. You are aligning with the same cycle that governs galaxies, forests, oceans, and seeds. To resist it is to exhaust yourself. To flow with it is to live in coherence with life itself. So as the threshold draws near, ask yourself not only what you are stepping into, but also what you are willing to release. Because what you set down creates the space for what will rise. Cycles prepare you, but something deeper links this moment to the future you're stepping toward. Entanglement. In quantum physics, entangled particles influence each other instantly. No matter how far apart they are, shift one, and the other responds even across distance. Your consciousness and your future work the same way. October 5th is not only a date waiting for you, it is also a reality already reaching back, tugging at you, arranging synchronicities to prepare you. The signs you've been noticing, the whispers, the signals, the pressure, these are not random. They are evidence of non-local correlation, a dialogue between who you are now and who you are becoming. Think of déjà vu, that eerie feeling you've stood here before, though logically you know you haven't. It may be less about memory and more about resonance, the future brushing against the present, leaving a trace. Moments like these hint that time does not flow only forward. It folds, connects, correlates. Thresholds are places where that folding becomes visible. Synchronicities operate the same way. You think of someone and they call. You stumble into the right book at the right hour. You overhear the exact phrase you needed. Skeptics call it coincidence, But those awake to entanglement recognize it as evidence your future is already in conversation with you. This is why attention matters. Because if you dismiss synchronicities as meaningless, you mute the dialogue. If you honor them as signals, you amplify the connection. You lean into the thread pulling you forward, and it grows stronger. October 5th is a symbol of entanglement. It reminds you that readiness now is not separate from what emerges then. Your focus, your coherence, your willingness to release all of it is already woven into the outcome. You are not walking toward a distant door. The door is also walking toward you. Consider relationships as another mirror of this. Two people meet, and instantly there is a sense of familiarity, as though their lives were already entangled before words were exchanged. The bond feels larger than time, as if threads had been weaving long before they crossed paths. That resonance is not just romance or friendship, it is entanglement made visible. Life often arranges encounters this way. The right mentor, the right opportunity, the right challenge arriving not randomly, but as if the future orchestrated it. Science has language for this too. In complex systems, researchers describe strange attractors, points that draw patterns of motion toward them, shaping the flow without direct force. Your October 5th moment acts as such an attractor. It pulls your choices, your encounters, your awareness into alignment with a larger pattern. The attraction is subtle, but once you sense it, you realize you've been moving toward it all along. And here's the paradox: while the future is tugging on you, you are also shaping the future with your present choices. Entanglement is not one-way traffic. It is a conversation. You prepare the ground here, and the future plants seeds there. You make a choice today, and tomorrow rearranges itself to meet it. Both directions are always active. This is why awareness of entanglement transforms how you live daily life. A small decision, a single conversation, a new perspective doesn't just affect your present, it reverberates forward, altering the shape of what greets you later. You are not passively waiting for October 5th to arrive. You are participating in its arrival. Think of it like tuning instruments before a concert. The orchestra has not yet begun, but already the notes echo, testing resonance, aligning pitch. Your synchronicities are those tuning notes. They are the signs that coherence is building, that the stage is being prepared, that the music is imminent. So when you notice the strange alignments, when you feel the tug of déjà vu, when you sense patterns too precise to be random, don't dismiss them. Lean in. They are threads connecting you to the threshold. They are proof that what waits on the other side is not separate from what you live now. Entanglement means this: you are not simply approaching October 5th. October 5th is approaching you. And in the space where you meet, the field of possibility collapses into form. If entanglement shows you the future is already reaching for you, then the final key is this: how do you cross barriers that seem immovable? This is where quantum tunneling offers its metaphor. In classical physics, if a particle doesn't have enough energy to overcome a barrier, it cannot pass. But in quantum mechanics, particles sometimes tunnel through barriers that should be impossible. They don't go over, they don't go around, they appear on the other side as if the wall dissolved. Your life has barriers that look equally solid, debt that seems insurmountable, dreams that feel too far, patterns that appear locked in. Logic insists you don't have enough energy, resources, or time to cross. But thresholds like October 5th operate under different rules. They allow you to tunnel, appearing on the other side not by brute force, but by coherence. The key is intention aligned with coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions converge on the same outcome, the barrier loses solidity. What looked impossible begins to dissolve. You don't climb the wall, you discover It was never real in the way you thought. Think of historical breakthroughs, medical cures that emerged after decades of failure, civil rights victories that seemed impossible until, suddenly, the wall gave way. Even personal stories, people who lived with addiction, loss, or struggle for years, only to find one aligned choice suddenly shifts everything. That is tunneling. The field bends when coherence reaches critical mass. And tunneling is not about denial. It doesn't pretend the wall isn't there. It acknowledges the wall, then steps into alignment so fully that the wall ceases to hold. It teaches you this. The greatest obstacles dissolve not from more effort, but from more coherence. Picture a river blocked by a dam. For years, the water presses, unable to pass. Engineers calculate the pressure, reinforce the walls, insist nothing can move, but underground, unseen, water seeps into cracks, eroding, carving hidden tunnels. Then one day, a breakthrough. The wall doesn't shatter in spectacle. It dissolves in silence. The river rushing forward as though the barrier never truly existed. That's tunneling. That's how transformation often moves quiet, subversive, unstoppable. In your own journey, the walls may take many forms. The voice that says you're not ready. The pattern that tells you this is just how life is. The past that whispers you've tried too many times before. Each feels concrete, but quantum tunneling says solidity is not absolute. Walls exist, but they are porous to coherence. When your intention aligns, what felt like stone becomes mist. And here's the crucial part. Tunneling does not require you to push harder, but to align deeper. When you force, you strengthen the wall. When you align, you dissolve it. This is why some people labor for decades without progress, then suddenly shift in an instant. The wall didn't change, their frequency did. They reached coherence, and coherence opened the path. Think about personal turning points you've witnessed. The artist who labored in obscurity, then one song, one canvas, one moment suddenly carried them through. The entrepreneur rejected 100 times, then one yes changed everything. The parent weighed down by years of difficulty, who, in a moment of clarity, found a strength they didn't know they carried. These aren't stories of walls destroyed by force. They are stories of walls dissolved by coherence. So let October 5th symbolize tunneling. Not just the end of waiting, not just the culmination of signals, pressure, and choice, but the passage through what once felt impossible. It is the moment where your alignment makes barriers irrelevant. The point where impossibility yields to coherence. Because in the end, walls are not what stop us. It is the fragmentation within that keeps us outside. And when you unify your mind, your heart, your action, the wall no longer holds authority. You tunnel, and you arrive, and now we arrive at the quiet close of this journey. We've walked through pressure and signals, through choice and coherence, through cycles and entanglement, and finally, through barriers that dissolve when you align. October 5th stands not just as a date, but as a symbol, a threshold that gathers every hidden preparation into one undeniable moment. But here, as we breathe, let's soften the intensity, because thresholds are not about fear of missing them, nor about frantic striving. They are about awareness, about choosing to be present when life becomes porous, when possibility leans close enough to touch. The message isn't hurry or lose. The message is wake up and notice. Think about how many times in your life you've already crossed thresholds without realizing it. The relationship that began quietly but shaped your path. The decision you made on an ordinary day that rewrote your story. The subtle moment when you chose resilience instead of surrender. Thresholds rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive in whispers, in openings, in invitations, and the real work is not forcing them, but recognizing them. So as October 5th approaches, carry this less as pressure and more as possibility. It is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about stepping into coherence with curiosity, about trusting that even the waiting, even the pressure, even the breaking points have been part of the choreography. If you find yourself resonating with these ideas, let that recognition be enough for now. No need to clutch, no need to force. Simply breathe into the awareness that you are standing at a threshold and that your consciousness itself is the key. Because the truth is simple: doors open quietly, cycles turn naturally, and the field responds faithfully to coherence. You are not late. You are not unprepared. You are exactly where the process needs you to be. So let October 5th remind you of this. The bridge is down, the moment is alive, and your awareness is participation enough. Step forward gently, with presence. The rest will follow.